My family stole my home while I was abroad, they didn't know who owned it now. At 2:07 a.m. London time, my phone vibrated against the hotel nightstand with the kind of urgency that bypasses logic and goes straight for the nervous system. One message. 7 words. Give me the code or I break in. No greeting. No context. Just a demand. I sat up slowly, the city outside my window silent and foreign. My name is Evelyn Cross. I'm 29. I make an uncomfortable amount of money telling corporations what will go wrong before it does. My work is simple in theory and brutal in practice: identify the single weak point in a stable system and neutralize it. For most of my life, that weak point wasn't a system. It was a person. I opened my laptop and pulled up the live building feed. The camera outside my former penthouse in Washington, D.C., blinked into focus. There she was, Marla Hensley, standing too close to the door, already surrounded by boxes, oversized bags, and confidence that hadn't been earned. She wasn't visiting. She was claiming. Marla believed the apartment still belonged to me. She didn't know I'd vacated it over 2 weeks earlier. She didn't know the lease had changed hands. And most importantly, she didn't know who slept there now. Her entitlement was familiar. Polished. Practiced. The kind that mistakes proximity for ownership. Another message came in. I know you're awake. Don't make this difficult. I adjusted my glasses and took a breath. Calm wasn't something I felt. It was something I applied. I didn't call the 2 people who had spent decades excusing her behavior. They would have done what they always did, reframed the situation until accountability dissolved. They would have told me this was my responsibility. That sharing was a virtue. That peace required sacrifice. I had already sacrificed enough. I assessed the variables instead. If she forced the lock, it would be vandalism. If I gave her access, she'd be digitally documented. That mattered. I typed my response carefully. Fine. Use 9942. But you handle everything inside. The reply was instant. Finally. Don't worry. I'll clean up your mess. I watched as she punched in the code. The indicator shifted from red to green. The door unlocked. The moment the system registered entry, I opened the admin panel and reassigned the credentials. Guest commercial vendor. Single-use access. Liability waiver, accepted. She stepped inside like a conqueror. Dropped her bags on the rug. Immediately started pulling down the curtains I'd left behind, muttering to herself like she was correcting a mistake the universe had made. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger. Recognition. I opened another window. A GPS tag updated in real time. A black SUV was moving south along I-295, fast and deliberate. The current occupant of that apartment was Grant Hale. Mid-40s. Federal enforcement background. A man whose definition of unexpected company ended badly for the company. ETA, 38 minutes. I poured myself a glass of water and waited. When Grant arrived, he didn't look like someone coming home. He scanned the hallway before the elevator doors had fully opened. His posture shifted the moment he noticed the door wasn't fully closed. That was all it took. The weapon appeared without drama. No shouting. No warning. Inside, Marla was humming. She'd moved on to the television mount, convinced it was negotiable. She never heard him. 1 second she was pulling. The next, she was on the floor. Pinned. Controlled. Terrified. Federal property. Don't move. Her scream cut through the apartment, pure disbelief. I belong here, she shouted. This place is mine. I have permission. Grant didn't respond. His focus was on angles. On threats. On what else might be hiding. Then the elevator chimed again. 2 familiar figures rushed in, the same ones who always arrive just in time to redirect consequences. They didn't assess the scene. They didn't ask questions. They charged. That's when one of them looked straight into the camera. Into me. This is your fault, she screamed. You set this up. I felt the old reflex stir, the instinct to explain, to soften, to take responsibility for someone else's gravity. I ignored it. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. I leaned closer to the screen. The system was about to finish what it started. And no one inside that apartment understood the rules they had already agreed to. The sirens grew louder, slicing through the walls like a countdown I didn't need to see. Inside the apartment, chaos arranged itself into something that looked almost convincing, a tableau of shock, outrage, and carefully rehearsed innocence. Grant still had Marla restrained, but his stance had shifted. Not relaxed. Calculating. He was no longer dealing with a trespasser. He was navigating a narrative. The two figures who had stormed in moments earlier hovered close to her now, shielding her with their bodies and their voices. One of them had already taken out a phone, fingers flying across the screen with practiced urgency. "She's being attacked," she cried into the device. "There's a man with a gun. She's terrified." Her voice was flawless. Controlled hysteria. The kind that turns authority into hesitation. Grant glanced toward the sound system on the wall, the one connected to the screen where my face would soon appear if I chose to intervene. His jaw tightened. He knew what was happening. I stayed silent. Because this wasn't new. I'd seen this pattern unfold 100 times in smaller rooms, over smaller disasters. A broken promise reframed as misunderstanding. A line crossed explained away as stress. Accountability diluted until it disappeared. Marla had learned early that consequences were optional if someone else absorbed the impact. And for years, that someone had been me. The police arrived fast. Too fast for reflection. Too fast for truth to settle. Uniforms filled the apartment, separating bodies, lowering weapons, raising questions that had already been answered incorrectly. Grant was pulled aside by a senior officer whose expression suggested exhaustion more than curiosity. Marla adjusted instantly. The tears stopped. Her breathing slowed. She smoothed her clothes and sat upright, as if composure alone could rewrite the last 5 minutes. "He attacked me for no reason," she said softly. "I live here." Grant's head snapped toward her. "That's not." She cut him off by producing a folded document from her bag. Paper. Official looking. Convincing at a glance. "A lease," she said. "Signed. Valid." I felt something cold settle behind my eyes. The officer took it. "Read it." Nodded slowly. If this were any other building, any other door, any other system, that might have been the end of it. "Tenant laws are strict," the officer said, already halfway to disengaging. "This looks like a civil dispute." Grant looked like he might shatter something with his hands. Then his gaze lifted. Straight to the camera. "You didn't tell me she'd come prepared," he said, low and dangerous. I inhaled. It was time. The screen on the wall flickered, and my face filled the room, calm, composed, unmistakably present. "I didn't need to," I replied. "Because she prepared the wrong story." Every eye turned toward the screen. "Who is this?" the officer asked, one hand drifting back toward his radio. "I'm the property owner," I said evenly. "And the person who issued the access code used to enter this apartment today." The officer frowned. "She claims residency." "She claims incorrectly," I replied. "Please check the entry log on the smart panel by the door." There was a pause. The kind that stretches thin with anticipation. The officer complied. "Entry recorded," he read aloud. "User code 9942. "Correct," I said. "Now ask her what the screen displayed when she entered that code." Marla's eyes flicked toward the panel, then back to the officer. "Nothing. It just unlocked." "That's not true," I said. "And I can prove it." With a single command, the apartment display shifted. A digital contract appeared, time-stamped, verified, immutable. "Code 9942 is not a residential access code," I explained. "It's a commercial vendor credential. Temporary. Task-specific." The officer leaned closer to read. By accepting the prompt, I continued, she identified herself as a contracted service provider. Not a tenant. No residency rights. No claim to the property. Marla's voice cracked. "I didn't read it." "Failure to read a contract doesn't invalidate consent," I replied. "And that agreement explicitly prohibits removal of property." The room changed. You could feel it, the moment when paper loses to data. When performance collapses under verification. Grant straightened. "So she's not a squatter," he said. "She's refusing to leave a job site." "And attempting theft," I added calmly. The officer's expression hardened. "Step away from the bags," he ordered. Marla panicked. The figures who had protected her moments earlier froze, suddenly aware that the story they'd backed was collapsing under its own weight. "Check the yellow bag," I said. "Please." Inside were clothes. Bottles. And a ruggedized drive that didn't belong to her. "That was secured," I added. "Biometric. Forced open." Grant exhaled slowly. "That escalates this." The officer reached for his cuffs. "This is now a felony investigation." Marla screamed my name like it was a curse. One of the figures lunged forward, voice sharp with accusation. You set her up. I met the camera without blinking. No, I said. I stopped protecting her from gravity. The room fell silent. And for the first time in decades, the consequences were no longer negotiable. The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound I had waited years to hear. Not because I wanted her punished, that was never the point, but because for the first time, reality refused to bend. No explanations. No redirection. No one stepping forward to say, she didn't mean it. Marla fought them anyway. Her body went rigid as the officer guided her up, her voice sharp and desperate, firing in all directions at once. Accusations. Threats. Promises of lawsuits and ruined careers. She reached for the two figures who had always been her shield, searching their faces for rescue. They didn't move. That hesitation, barely a second, told me everything. For the first time, saving her carried a visible price. Grant stepped back as the officers escorted her toward the door. His posture stayed rigid, but I could see the shift behind his eyes. Relief mixed with something darker. Recognition. He wasn't dealing with a reckless intruder anymore. He was watching a system collapse. The hallway swallowed the noise as the door closed. Inside the apartment, what remained was quieter, and far more dangerous. The two people who had rushed in so confidently now stood apart, their earlier certainty drained. The one with the phone lowered it slowly, as if suddenly aware it could no longer protect anyone. This is insane, she said, voice trembling. You went too far. I almost smiled. Because that sentence had been my entire life. Every boundary I'd set had been labeled cruelty. Every refusal, betrayal. Every attempt to protect myself reframed as aggression. I warned you, I said evenly. Years ago. I said this would happen. She shook her head. You're exaggerating. She just made a mistake. No, I replied. She made a pattern. Silence stretched. Grant cleared his throat. The drive, he said. You mentioned it was empty. It was, I confirmed. A decoy. The officer nearest him frowned. Why keep something like that lying around? I paused. Because people don't steal what they don't feel entitled to, I said. I needed proof of intent. That landed harder than I expected. The room shifted again, not toward anger this time, but understanding. The kind that comes too late to repair anything. One of them stepped forward, eyes glassy. You planned this? Yes, I said. Not the break-in. Not the arrest. But the moment you'd choose her story over mine. She flinched. That was the truth they couldn't argue with. For as long as I could remember, every conflict ended the same way, with me apologizing for damage I didn't cause, absorbing consequences meant for someone else. I had been the buffer. The correction. The quiet fix behind the scenes. Until I stopped. The officer nearest the door spoke again, tone cautious now. There may be questions for you later. About the access code. I'll cooperate fully, I replied. All logs are archived. Time-stamped. Verified. Grant gave a short nod. He believed me. They left shortly after, the uniforms, the authority, the tension. What remained behind felt heavier without them. The apartment was still beautiful. Minimal. Untouched by sentiment. The kind of place designed for control. They looked around as if seeing it for the first time. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly. You could have just told us you moved. I did, I replied. Months ago. You didn't hear it because it didn't benefit you. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I leaned closer to the camera. You taught her that consequences were optional, I continued. That someone else would always pay. That gravity was negotiable. Her voice cracked. We were protecting her. No, I said. You were insulating yourselves. That landed differently. Because it was true. Protecting her meant never facing what she'd become. Never admitting they'd failed to correct it. Never questioning the roles they'd assigned. One of them looked away. Where is she now? He asked quietly. In processing, I said. And for the first time, she's alone in it. Neither of them spoke. I felt something loosen in my chest then. Not satisfaction. Not joy. Relief. The kind that comes when you finally set something heavy down. I won't be coming back, I added. Not to fix this. Not to smooth it over. She swallowed hard. So that's it? Yes, I said gently. That's accountability. I disconnected the feed. The screen went dark. In the quiet that followed, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished. The quiet after disconnecting felt unfamiliar. Not empty, exposed. I sat there in the hotel room, the city outside still breathing, unaware that something fundamental had shifted in my life. For years, noise had followed me everywhere, accusations disguised as concern, emergencies manufactured from boredom, guilt delivered with surgical precision. Now there was none of it. And that terrified me more than the confrontation ever had. Because silence has a way of asking questions you can't outsource. I replayed the scene in my head, not for strategy, not for mistakes, but for confirmation. I needed to be sure I hadn't crossed some invisible line that couldn't be uncrossed. The truth arrived calmly. I hadn't crossed a line. I'd stepped out of a role. For as long as I could remember, my function had been simple: absorb impact. Translate chaos into solvable problems. Turn emotional wreckage into something manageable so others could continue believing everything was fine. That belief had a cost. And I had been paying it quietly for decades. My phone buzzed. A message. Then another. Then 5 more. I didn't open them. I already knew the progression. First outrage. Then confusion. Then the soft panic of realizing I wasn't rushing in to stabilize things anymore. An hour passed. Then 2. Eventually, a single message broke through my resolve, not because it was urgent, but because it was different. We need to talk. Not about what happened. Not to fix this. Just talk. That was new. I stared at the screen for a long moment before placing the phone face down on the desk. For the first time, the silence wasn't something I needed to fill. The next update came the following morning. Legal. Administrative. Procedural. Marla hadn't slept. Processing took longer when the story kept changing. When tears stopped working. When there was no one left to redirect blame toward. The charges hadn't disappeared. They'd solidified. Unauthorized access. Attempted removal of secured property. Interference with protected assets. Gravity, it turned out, was very consistent. Another message arrived, longer this time. Careful. Measured. It wasn't an apology. It was an explanation. A detailed one. Context. Intentions. History rewritten with softer edges, as if enough words could sand down what had already happened. I read it once. Then I closed it. Because explanations without accountability are just rehearsals for the next offense. I went for a walk. The city smelled like rain and old stone. People moved with purpose around me, each carrying private burdens I would never know. It struck me how little space my family occupied in this world, and how enormous they'd felt inside my head. Perspective is cruel like that. By the time I returned to the hotel, the messages had stopped. That was when I understood the real shift. They weren't angry anymore. They were afraid. Because for the first time, they were alone with the consequences they'd helped create, and there was no one left to soften the landing. That evening, Grant called. I wanted you to hear it directly, he said. The case is moving forward. I expected that, I replied. He hesitated. You know they'll blame you for this. A faint smile touched my lips. They already did, I said. This time, it didn't work. He exhaled slowly. You handled it clean. Clean isn't the same as easy, I said. No, he agreed. It never is. After the call ended, I sat by the window and watched the city lights flicker on one by one. I felt lighter. Not because justice had been served, that was still unfolding, but because the weight of responsibility I'd never agreed to carry was finally off my shoulders. Silence returned. And this time, it felt earned. Public accountability moves slower than emotion. It doesn't care how loud someone cries or how convincingly they explain themselves. It advances on paperwork, timestamps, and contradictions, quiet, methodical, unavoidable. That's what made it terrifying. The formal notice arrived 2 days later. Not addressed to me, that would have been too familiar, but to them. I knew before I read it what it would say. Requests for statements. Verification of past incidents. A pattern emerging where everyone had sworn there wasn't one. Patterns don't accuse. They reveal. My phone rang once. I let it go to voicemail. Then again. On the third attempt, I listened. The voice on the other end wasn't angry this time. It was tired. They're asking about the car, he said. From Seattle. I closed my eyes. Of course they were. Incidents never live in isolation. Once scrutiny begins, it travels backward, connecting dots no one wanted connected. They want to know why you paid for it, he continued. Why she wasn't cited. I said nothing. They're asking why the insurance deductible came from your account. Still nothing. Because any answer I gave would have sounded like an accusation, and I was done explaining the obvious. They think we enabled her, he finished quietly. I opened my eyes and looked out at the city. No, I said. They're confirming it. The silence on the line stretched. You could help us, he said finally. Clarify things. Soften the narrative. There it was. Even now, even after everything, the instinct remained the same, use me to stabilize the fallout. I already helped, I replied. For years. That's not fair. It's accurate. He exhaled sharply. You're punishing us. I considered that. No, I said. I stopped rescuing you. Another silence. This one heavier. That afternoon, I received confirmation that the forged lease had been traced. Printer logs. Metadata. A signature lifted from an old document and reused without care. Intent, documented. The charge list grew. So did the distance. Messages slowed. Then stopped. No more requests to talk. No more emotional appeals. No more urgency. That was how I knew they were running out of leverage. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what would replace it. A week later, the final call came, not from them, but from an unfamiliar number. A calm voice. Professional. Neutral. We're closing our internal review, she said. Your cooperation has been noted. I thanked her and ended the call. There was nothing left to say. That evening, I packed my suitcase. Not in a rush. Not with anger. Just with intention. As I zipped it shut, I realized something that felt almost foreign. I trusted myself. Not to fix things. Not to anticipate disasters. But to walk away from what no longer deserved access to me. Justice didn't arrive with applause. It arrived with distance. And distance, I learned, was its own form of peace. There is a strange moment that comes after everything ends. Not relief. Not celebration. Just silence, the kind that rings in your ears because you're no longer bracing for impact. I felt it the first morning I woke up without checking my phone. No alerts. No crisis. No one demanding I explain, translate, smooth over, or sacrifice. For the first time in years, nothing needed me. That was when the grief arrived. Not for them, for myself. For the version of me who believed love was something you earned by being useful. For the years I confused endurance with loyalty. For how calmly I accepted blame just to keep the peace. I had been trained to absorb damage quietly. To be the shock absorber so others could crash without consequence. And when I finally stepped aside, gravity did what it always does. It pulled everything down. The legal outcomes unfolded exactly as predicted. No drama. No courtroom speeches. Just consequences. The forged lease became a criminal charge. The attempted misrepresentation escalated into intent. The prior incidents, the car, the insurance payments, the misunderstandings, stopped looking like accidents when lined up chronologically. Patterns again. The word appeared in every report. Pattern. She didn't call me when the reality settled in. She called them. And for the first time, they couldn't fix it. That was the part no one prepares you for, watching people realize that the system they relied on no longer bends. I heard later, through someone else, that the plea negotiations were quiet and humiliating. No leverage. No sympathy discount. Just facts. And once facts take over, emotions become irrelevant. They tried once more, not to reconcile, but to negotiate access. A message arrived weeks later. Short. Careful. We should talk. There are things that belong to all of us. I stared at it for a long time. Then deleted it. Because here is the truth no one tells you. You don't owe closure to people who benefited from your silence. Closure is not a group activity. I moved into a smaller place after that. Nothing dramatic. No skyline views. No smart systems. Just clean lines. Quiet rooms. A door that locked behind me without a code anyone else knew. The first night, I sat on the floor with a glass of cheap wine and felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Safety. Not the illusion of it, the real kind. The kind that doesn't depend on being needed. I still do the same work. I still identify risks. I still prevent collapses. But now, when I find the loose screw, I don't ignore it because it shares my last name. I don't secure systems that are designed to fail on someone else's back. I let them fall. Because some structures aren't meant to be saved. They're meant to be exposed. If you're listening to this and something in your chest feels tight, let me say this clearly. You are not cruel for stepping back. You are not selfish for choosing stability. You are not obligated to protect people who weaponize your empathy. Sometimes the most just thing you can do is stop intervening. Let reality do the work. And when the noise finally dies down, and you're left alone with your thoughts, you may realize what I did. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It simply stays. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Have a nice day.